The objective is students will understand and recount the key or 4 key elements of classical conditioning. So the key elements of classical conditioning, there are 4 that are used to describe the process of this. So classical conditioning. All right, number 1 is we have an unconditioned stimulus, which we will refer to as the UN when we look at this a little further. So the unconditioned stimulus, the UCS, is any stimulus that consistently produces a particular naturally occurring automatic response. So a behavior that elicits a response, okay? In Pavlov's experiment, the unconditioned stimulus is meat powder. So they use that as food to kind of help train a dog. Secondly, we have an unconditioned response. So the unconditioned response is the response that occurs automatically when the uncontrolled stimulus is presented. An unconditioned response is reflexive, involuntary response that predictably is caused by the unconditioned stimulus. In Pavlov's experiments, the unconditioned response was the salivation. So we're looking at this one in this experiment. This one will be food. These are unconditioned. This one is salivation. Okay, now we have something called the conditioned stimulus. Yes, sir. I thought you were raising your hand.
Isn't the salivation one about when they'd actually do with the noise or sound?
Yes, the sound and the dog. Yes,
like
that's correct. So, yes, so you guys do have some background knowledge in this, and we're going to look at it a little more deep. So yes, you are correct with the bell and the noise. Yeah, so we'll look at that a little bit more. Okay, the conditioned stimulus is the stimulus that is neutral at the start of the conditioning process and does not normally produce an unconditioned response. Yet, through repeated association with unconditioned stimulus, the conditioned stimulus triggers a very similar response to that caused by the unconditioned stimulus. So, association refers to the pairing or links of one stimulus with another stimulus. So we have the word association. It links the two, okay? In Pavlov's experiments, the bell and subsequently other stimuli were initially neutral, but each became associated with the meat powder. So when you mentioned the noise, it was the bell that Pavlov used, which we'll look at in just a sec. Once conditioning has occurred and the originally neutral stimulus produces the response of salivating, then it is called a controlled stimulus, or a conditioned stimulus. So now we have the 4th one, which is conditioned response. You guys should be writing these down. So the conditioned response is the learned response that is produced by the conditioned stimulus. The conditioned response occurs after the conditioned stimulus with the unconditioned stimulus. There's a lot of stimuluses. Stimuli. The behavior involved in the CR is very similar to that of the UR and is triggered by the conditioned stimulus. So Pavlov's dogs displayed a CR, so salivation, only when they began to salivate to a conditioned stimulus. So when the dog responded to a CS, such as the sound of a bell, classical conditioning has taken place because salivation would not be a usual response to a sound of a bell. So what happened is we'll look at it a little further. You look at the next slide there. So now we're going to look at this graph here. So we have the unconditioned. What does that do here? We have the unconditioned stimulus, the unconditioned controlled stimulus, and the controlled response. Okay, so look, you got this. We have the neutral part, which is a bell. So we have the neutral stimulus, so a bell. He rings the bell. Is the dog going to do anything to the sound of the bell if it never heard one before?
It might whimper or like jump at it.
Maybe whimper, jump at it or something. So he rings the bell. There's really no response from the dog. And we're talking about salivating, so that's like the drooling of a dog in essence. So then during conditioning, this is what happens. So this is kind of puts these into this graph here. So the neutral stimulus, you have the bell. It means nothing. But then when you do that, and then you have an unconditioned stimulus, which is food, then the dog begins to salivate because it wants the food. But that's an unconditioned response. It has not been trained to salivate at the sound of a bell with food. And that, as it progresses on, you continue to do the bell, you ring the bell, you give the dog food, the dog will salivate, and it will begin to, and then it will begin to salivate. So as time goes on, the dog will, as the dog is conditioned, what happens is you ring the bell, the dog will start salivating without even showing it food, because it's been trained to be able to do so. Yes, sir.
Question. Isn't it kind of the same thing with like people in phones nowadays? Because like if you just hear like some bells just go like normally, you just think, oh, some bells. But with some ringtones, you might like pick up your phone and kind of.
Yeah, you can say that, I would guess.
It's kind of like a key response.
Yeah, a keyed response in essence. That would be a good way to describe it. So again, you have the bell means nothing to the dog at first, but then when you do the bell mixed with food, the dog's going to be happy to get food, so it will start to drool or salivate. And then as time goes on, it will learn that the bell will, every time it hears the bell, that there's going to be food associated with that, so the dog will start to salivate. This is called classical conditioning, which is what you see it a lot in society with a lot of things, especially within the classroom. Right? All right, next slide. Okay, again, here's another example how training works. So before conditioning, you have food, you have a response, which is the salivating. So you have an unconditioned stimulus, you have an unconditioned response. Then you start the bell. So this is the neutral stimulus. You have no conditioned response because he doesn't know anything about the bell.